A serious hunting experience. I was 15, living in central Minnesota, and had been hunting on my grandparents' property since I was 12. Hunting with my dad and older brother was a rite of passage, and I was getting good at it. But one hunting trip stands out as the most terrifying experience of my life. It was around the second weekend of hunting season. After a frustrating morning with no luck, my brother and I decided to walk back to the main house through a snowy field instead of trudging through the dense woods. On our way, we stumbled upon an abandoned pickup truck, parked about 40 yards off the road. It was eerie, with no signs of recent use. Tracks led off into the woods in several directions. On the dashboard was a pile of mail addressed to someone named Gamble, a name neither of us recognized. Curious but cautious, we decided to head back and tell our dad about the strange truck. As we mentioned the name Gamble, my grandmother immediately recognized it. "Oh, that's a lady who lived a few miles from here," she said. My dad hopped on the four-wheeler to check if the truck was stuck or broken down and offered help. But when he got down there, about 20 minutes after my brother and I first saw the truck, it was gone without a trace. We all shrugged it off and enjoyed a warm lunch, sharing hunting stories from the morning. Later that day, after a quick snap of photos, we mapped out our strategies for the afternoon hunt and headed out to our stands. As dusk fell, I settled into my hunting spot, lost in thought but keeping an eye out for any movement. The thick brush on the edge of a swamp was a favorite spot for afternoon deer migrations. As night deepened, I suddenly saw a flash of brown out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then it slipped behind a pile of brush. I assumed it was about 50 yards away, moving my way. I lifted my .30 Western Field lever-action rifle to my waist and stood silently in my stand, keeping the safety on. Minutes passed with nothing happening, and I began to doubt my senses. Then a low growl emerged from the thick brush. My first thought was a wounded deer, but the growl turned into a deep snarl. I realized it was a bear, common in these woods but still intimidating. The growling grew louder as the creature moved closer. I put the safety back on my gun but kept it ready. The growling stopped abruptly, replaced by a terrifying snarl and a scream that shook me to my core. I knew bears don't scream like that. It sounded almost human. Suddenly, I saw it. A Bengal tiger, about 8 feet long with striking orange and black stripes, standing just 35 yards away in the snowy woods. I had seen tigers in books and zoos, but never in the wild, let alone in Minnesota. Frozen with fear, I couldn't move. The tiger snarled and let out another scream before leaping into the woods and vanishing into the darkness. I sat in my stand, heart pounding, unable to process what I had just witnessed. I debated shooting the apparition, but couldn't bring myself to act. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to leave immediately. I walked back to the house as fast as I could, every rustle of the snow making me jump. When I finally got home, my family was skeptical. They believed I saw something, but a Bengal tiger was hard to believe in our area. They thought it might have been a large wildcat or a mountain lion, but I insisted on what I saw. That night remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life, a mystery that still haunts me to this day. Shadows of Buckhorn State Park. I've been a park ranger here at Buckhorn State Park for the past few years, venturing into some of the most remote areas the park system has to offer. My backcountry camping experiences are countless, and I've faced my fair share of wildlife encounters, especially during those eerie nights when the forest feels alive with unseen eyes. I'm well versed in the wilderness and familiar with the rich tapestry of Native American legends, including the dreaded skinwalkers. One late summer night, I decided to set up camp deep within the forest, right by the still waters of Lake Serene. The day had been peaceful, hiking around the lake, watching deer graze, foxes darting through the underbrush, and beavers busily building their lodges. Such abundant wildlife usually meant the area was safe. After a few hours of setting up my tent and lighting a fire, I settled in, enjoying a quiet drink and the comforting sounds of nature. the gentle lapping of water, the distant hoot of owls, and the rustle of nocturnal creatures. Around 11 p.m., an unsettling silence fell over the forest. The usual symphony of night sounds abruptly ceased, leaving an oppressive stillness. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. I lay down in my tent, the warmth of the fire giving way to the cool night air. Just as I began to drift off, a single, haunting hoot echoed through the trees. It wasn't the familiar call of a common owl. It was distorted, almost human, filled with anguish and desperation. My heart raced. I listened intently, but the sound faded as quickly as it had come. I dismissed it as an odd vocalization from a lone owl and tried to sleep. However, the silence was deceptive. Throughout the night, intermittent, eerie cries pierced the darkness, each one seeming to draw closer to my campsite. Every so often, I caught glimpses of movement near the lake, shadows flitting between trees, shapes that vanished when I tried to focus on them. At around 1 a.m., the cries intensified, now unmistakably near, about 100 yards from my tent. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out into the night. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but dense foliage and the still surface of the lake. Heart pounding, I scanned the area, but saw no signs of life. The silence returned, thick and heavy. Minutes later, the cries returned, even closer this time. I swung my flashlight frantically, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the sound, but the forest remained empty. Exhausted and terrified, I retreated to my tent, forcing myself to stay silent and still. Sleep eluded me as the night dragged on, filled with the haunting sounds that refused to let me rest. Morning broke with a pale light filtering through the trees. As I packed up my gear, something caught my eye near the edge of my tent. Large, bipedal footprints marred the soft earth, prints too large and irregular to belong to any known animal in the park. They led from my tent towards the lake, but abruptly stopped halfway, as if whatever had been walking them vanished into thin air. Disturbed, I returned to the ranger station and shared my experience. Other rangers recounted similar sightings, mutilated deer near the lake and unexplained sounds that defied logical explanation. The legend of the skinwalkers seemed less like myth and more like a terrifying reality. Now, every time I hear a distant cry or spot an unusual shadow, I can't help but feel that Buckhorn State Park harbors secrets best left undisturbed. Night watch on an icebreaker boat. Back in 1990, I was stationed on an icebreaker boat cruising south through icy waters. One night, I was on night watch on the bridge. It was pitch black, and almost all the lights were off to help our night vision adjust. The bridge was silent, save for the faint hum of the engines and the occasional crackle from the radio. I was leaning against the chart table, half talking to two other watchstanders nearby, when suddenly everything changed. In the blink of an eye, it was as if daylight had replaced the darkness. The bridge was illuminated by a bright yellowish orb that seemed to be floating just above the ship. It moved swiftly from east to west, too fast to be any known aircraft or vessel. There was no sound accompanying it, just a silent, glowing presence moving across the horizon. I jumped off the chart table and rushed to the flying bridge, trying to get a better look. The orb hovered momentarily before disappearing beyond the horizon. The darkness returned, even more profound than before, as if the light had drained all the shadows from the night. Almost immediately, the phones on the bridge lit up with frantic calls from all over the ship. Everyone described seeing the same thing, a bright, moving orb. Some thought it was a meteor, others a flare, and a few even whispered about UFOs. We checked our radar and found nothing. There were no surface contacts or any other indications of what the orb could have been. We initiated a search pattern, thinking it might have been a flare launched by someone in the area. We scoured the waters and the sky, but found no trace of it. The mystery remained unsolved, and none of us ever figured out what exactly we had witnessed that night. It was a brief, inexplicable encounter that left us all questioning the unknown forces that might exist beyond our understanding. Lost among the pines. Growing up, scouting trips were the highlight of my childhood. Every spring and summer, our troop embarked on backpacking adventures, exploring the vast wilderness and forging bonds that would last a lifetime. As the years passed and I approached the age to leave the troop, we planned one final, ambitious backpacking trip to a series of remote lakes nestled in the mountains. The first days were everything a scout could hope for: clear trails, breathtaking views, and encounters with fellow hikers. However, on the third day, our peaceful expedition took a dark turn. A scout from a neighboring troop reported that his friend had gone missing while exploring a nearby trail. Panic spread quickly, and the once joyful atmosphere turned tense and fearful. That evening, one of their scouts broke his arm during a frantic search and had to leave to get medical help. With one boy still missing, the situation became dire. A rescue team was dispatched immediately, but as night fell, hope dwindled. The missing boy was nowhere to be found. Desperate to keep everyone calm and safe, the leaders decided to join us for the night, consolidating our camps to stay close together. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife stifled by an oppressive silence. As darkness deepened, searchlights from helicopters swept over our combined campsite, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. The sound of dogs barking and rangers' commands filled the night air, but there was no sign of the missing boy. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig, sent waves of fear through us. Whispers of skinwalkers and other forest spirits circulated among the scouts, tales meant to scare us, but now chillingly plausible. My mind raced with the possibilities. Had the boy encountered something supernatural, or was there a more sinister human element at play? At around 3 a.m., a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by frantic shouts and the sounds of struggle. Everyone sprang to attention, eyes wide with terror. The searchlights swung wildly, illuminating trees and tentatively approaching paths, but nothing concrete was found. Exhausted and scared, we huddled together, the shared fear forging an unspoken bond among us. By dawn, the missing boy was found, horribly injured and traumatized, unable to explain how he survived. His description of shadowy figures and inhuman sounds matched the legends we had dismissed as mere stories. The incident left a lasting scar on all of us, a stark reminder of the thin veil between childhood adventures and the terrifying unknown that lurks in the heart of the wilderness. From that trip onward, I always adhered strictly to the buddy system and carried a loud whistle, a constant reminder of the night when the forest revealed its darkest secrets. The memory of those lost hours among the pines remains with me, a haunting testament to the unseen dangers that hide in the shadows. Skinwalker Ranch Incident. I live in a small town in Utah on a skinwalker ranch, a place steeped in Native American legends and eerie folklore. Tonight was one of those nights that made me question everything. I woke up at exactly 3 a.m., feeling unusually warm -90 degrees in my room. Before I fully woke, I heard faint talking and laughter, so I opened my eyes but saw nothing. I kept hearing a popping sound in my ceiling directly above my head. It was like small, sharp noises, almost rhythmic. Suddenly, I felt an intense urge to stick my head out of my window. Despite the fear gnawing at me, I did it. The cold night air hit my face, but I didn't see anything unusual. About 20 minutes after I stuck my head out, I got an insanely bad headache and started vomiting. It was as if something had affected me physically. Every time I tried to sleep after that, something kept waking me up. My feet felt like they were burning, as if I had them over a fire. I couldn't understand what was happening. The room was too hot, and the strange sounds kept me awake, leaving me desperate to return to sleep, but unable to find any comfort. I've tried researching and asking around, but nothing seems to explain what happened that night. Living on a ranch with its dark history and connection to skinwalker legends, I can't help but wonder if what I experienced was something supernatural or just a bizarre, unexplained phenomenon. It's nights like these that make me wary of the unknown forces that might be lurking just beyond the safety of my home. The night patrol in Yosemite. I had just graduated from the police academy, brimming with ambition and a desire to make a real difference. My first assignment led me to Yosemite National Park, a place renowned for its stunning beauty, but also whispered about in local lore for darker reasons. Eager to prove myself, I set out early one morning, determined to handle whatever came my way. The winding mountain roads of Yosemite are deceptively beautiful, but they can quickly become a maze for the unprepared. After hours of driving, the familiar signs began to blur, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was lost. Panic set in as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense forest surrounding me. My GPS was unreliable in these remote areas, and the map I had was proving useless. As night enveloped the forest, an unsettling silence took hold. Just as I began to calm myself, a rustling sound emerged from the dense underbrush. Instinctively, I reached for my sidearm, every nerve on edge. The rustling grew louder, and out of the darkness stepped a figure that made my blood run cold. It stood tall, hunched over, with fur covering its body and eyes that glowed an unnatural red in the dim light of my flashlight. Recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a skinwalker, the very creature from Native American legends, known for its shape-shifting and malevolent nature. I tried to steady my voice. "Back off," I commanded, hoping intimidation would work. The creature didn't respond. Instead, it moved with a terrifying speed, lunging towards me with claws extended. I fired my weapon, but the shots echoed harmlessly through the trees. The skinwalker was too fast, slipping through the foliage like smoke. It disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing alone, trembling and breathless. I stumbled forward, the fear overwhelming my senses, every rustle and snap of a twig making me jump. Desperate to find my way back, I pushed through the dense forest, the oppressive fear gnawing at my resolve. The night seemed endless, the forest closing in around me. Hours passed before I finally caught sight of the ranger station in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Upon reaching safety, I reported the encounter to my superiors, but skepticism met my story. Nonetheless, the physical evidence, the claw marks on my gear, and the sheer terror in my recounting left little doubt in my mind. That night in Yosemite was a stark reminder that some legends are born from harsh realities, and that the wilderness can conceal horrors beyond imagination. Encountered near the summit. A few years ago, a group of friends and I decided to embark on a challenging hike through a remote jungle mountain area. The trail was beautiful, with lush vegetation, towering trees, and the sounds of exotic wildlife all around us. We were excited about the adventure, eager to explore untouched wilderness and reach the summit after a long day of trekking. As we neared the summit, the trail became steeper and more rugged. We took frequent breaks, savoring the stunning views and the sense of accomplishment with each step closer to the top. After hours of hiking, we set up camp near the summit, exhausted but thrilled with our progress. That night, as I lay in my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls. But amidst the natural noises, there was something else, an unsettling presence that I couldn't quite identify. Around midnight, I heard a soft whisper in my native language, right by my ear. It sounded like someone was speaking directly to me, saying, "This is not good." I froze, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. My dog, Rex, a vigilant German shepherd, started growling and pacing near the tent entrance. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was overpowering. I sat up, heart racing, and looked around the darkened jungle. There was no one else in the campsite, just the thick foliage and shadows moving with the night breeze. Suddenly, I felt a breath on my neck, followed by an intense pressure that made it hard to move. My adrenaline surged, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around, trying to spot any movement. The light flickered across the trees, but I saw nothing. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, repeating the same eerie message. I realized that something unnatural was out there, something that didn't belong in this pristine wilderness. Determined to stay safe, I quickly packed up my gear and called out to my friends, urging them to wake up and leave the campsite immediately. We moved swiftly through the dark jungle, guided only by the dim light of our headlamps. The whispers followed us, echoing through the trees and making it hard to focus. As we hiked away from the summit, the oppressive feeling lifted, and the jungle sounds returned to normal. We didn't stop until we were safely back at the base, shaken by the experience but relieved to be out of the haunted summit area. That night remains one of the most unsettling moments of our hiking adventures, a reminder that some places hold secrets better left unexplored. Encounter on 32nd Street. We were crossing 32nd Street to head toward my car when we heard what sounded like a baby crying. At first, we thought it might be a neighbor's child, but then my father pointed toward the house across the street and called out, "Mariah, Major." I looked and saw a thin black figure perched on a brick fence post, staring directly at us. The figure was jet black, almost absorbing the light around it. It had long, pointed ears and a slim, agile body with a long, pointed tail that swung back and forth like a cat's. But the most striking feature was its glowing red eyes, fixed directly on my father and me. I was frozen in fear, my mind racing on how to protect my elderly father if this thing decided to attack. Without thinking, I urged my father to get into the car quickly. I pressed the remote button to unlock the doors, the horn sounding its chirp as the alarm deactivated. As soon as the horn sounded, the creature opened its wings and stood up on the fence post, chirping back at us in a haunting, eerie sound. My family's camping experience. My family spends most of our summer weeks camping at a nearby state park. We're seasoned campers, so we know the local wildlife well and how to keep them at bay. On the first night of this year's trip, we finished dinner and stowed all the food back in the car. Not long after dark, we heard rustling in the tree line around our campsite, followed by the appearance of a raccoon. We let him sniff around our picnic table, thinking that if we scared him off, he'd leave us alone. But if he saw there was no food left, he might move on to other campsites. The raccoon circled our picnic table, standing up on his hind legs to get a better sniff of the empty table. Then he darted past our car toward the next campsite. At first, we thought he was just heading away, but soon realized he was moving toward our vehicle. We heard the loud rustling of a chip bag and went to investigate. Turns out, we'd left the car window open, and the raccoon climbed in and helped himself to a bag of potato chips. He made a mess. Chip crumbs scattered all over the seat and floor, with muddy paw prints on the seats and hood of the car. He scampered off as soon as we opened the door, but the damage was done. The next night, we double and triple checked that the car was all closed up. The raccoon came back and lingered near the car longer than usual, but our efforts to secure the food kept him away this time. Still, the experience left us a bit uneasy, reminding us that even seasoned campers have to stay vigilant against the clever wildlife lurking in the woods. Jungle and mountain hiking near the summit. A few years ago, a group of friends and I decided to go hiking in a remote jungle area near a mountain summit. We were excited about the challenge and the adventure, eager to explore the untouched wilderness. The hike was beautiful, with lush vegetation, towering trees, and the sounds of exotic wildlife all around us. As we neared the summit, the trail became steeper and more rugged. We took breaks frequently, enjoying the stunning views and the sense of accomplishment as we climbed higher. After a long day of hiking, we set up camp near the summit, exhausted but thrilled with our progress. That night, as I lay in my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The jungle was alive with sounds: chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls. But there was something else, an unsettling presence that I couldn't quite identify. Around midnight, I heard a soft whisper in my native language, right by my ear. It sounded like someone was speaking directly to me, saying, "This is not good." I froze, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. My dog, a vigilant German shepherd named Rex, started growling and pacing near the tent entrance. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was overpowering. I sat up, heart racing, and looked around the darkened jungle. There was no one else in the campsite, just the thick foliage and shadows moving with the night breeze. Suddenly, I felt a breath on my neck, followed by an intense pressure that made it hard to move. My adrenaline surged, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around, trying to spot any movement. The light flickered across the trees, but I saw nothing. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, repeating the same eerie message. I realized that something unnatural was out there, something that didn't belong in this pristine wilderness. Determined to stay safe, I quickly packed up my gear and called out to my friends, urging them to wake up and leave the campsite immediately. We moved swiftly through the dark jungle, guided only by the dim light of our headlamps. The whispers followed us, echoing through the trees and making it hard to focus. As we hiked away from the summit, the oppressive feeling lifted, and the jungle sounds returned to normal. We didn't stop until we were safely back at the base, shaken by the experience but relieved to be out of the haunted summit area. That night remains one of the most unsettling moments of our hiking adventures, a reminder that some places hold secrets better left unexplored. Julia's experience. My name is Julia. I spent countless nights scouring the internet for answers to something that happened to me twice. Once when I was 15 or 16, and again when I was 20. Both times, what I experienced left me shaken and searching for explanations. First encounter. The outdoors. It was either spring or early autumn, somewhere between 3 and 4 p.m. I was hanging out in a wooded area with a friend, enjoying the calm and beauty of nature. The sun wasn't setting yet, but the light was dim, filtered through the thick canopy of trees. Suddenly, in a spot where the trees were less dense, I saw something strange. A static-like, snowish effect hovering in the air. It was subtle, almost ethereal, like a mix of snowflakes and white glitter falling in slow motion within a large circular area. It didn't drift from the sky or settle on the ground. It just appeared and slowly faded toward the edges. I turned to my friend, and she saw it too. We stood there, not shocked but deeply curious. The sky was gray, and the wooded area made everything feel mysterious. I thought it might be moisture evaporating or something natural, so I stepped into the spot to feel if there was any change. Nothing. The air was the same, no moisture on my skin, no difference in the environment. After a while, we just left, thinking it was some odd but natural phenomenon. For years, I shrugged it off as a strange weather effect. Second encounter. The indoors. Fast forward a few years to when I was 20 and attending college. I was in one of my classes, sitting with another friend at the first table of the right row. The classroom had 3 vertical rows of tables, 2 students per table, all facing left. From my perspective, I was near the teacher's desk, with my friend sitting just out of my direct line of sight. We had already finished our assignment and were waiting for the rest of the class to finish. It was quiet and dull, the perfect setting for something eerie to happen. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the same static snow-like phenomenon appeared above the teacher's desk, right below the ceiling. This time, it was bigger, about 16 to 20 inches in diameter, and hovered in the air, sparkling with that same snow glitter effect. I froze. My earlier theory of moisture was out the window. There were no open windows or vents nearby that could explain it. Plus, I could see my friend staring at the same spot, completely unaware of what I saw until I nodded to him. He looked just as shocked, but the rest of the class was oblivious, heads down on their work. The phenomenon lingered for a moment, and then faded away, leaving the room in the same quiet state as before. We couldn't explain what we saw. No signs of moisture, no dust, nothing that indicated a natural cause. It was like a three-dimensional, glittery snowstorm frozen in midair. Both of us were left with more questions than answers, wondering if it was some kind of supernatural occurrence or something entirely unexplained. Telegraph incident. This happened around 2008 to 2009, and I'm only now sharing the story. I'm 56 years old and have told this to just 2 people before. I was driving south on Telegraph Road towards Toledo, Ohio, after picking up my brother in LaSalle, Michigan. He's 2 years younger than me, and we've always been close. We had just passed a horse farm when we entered a stretch of wooded area, not too thick, just enough trees to obscure the road. I was driving at 55 miles per hour when something caught my eye to the right. My brother had a stunned look on his face, staring at this thing ahead of us. At first, I thought it was a man with a jetpack, but then I noticed it had wings. This thing was about 7 to 8 feet long, black in color, with enormous wings that flapped silently as it kept pace with our car. I turned my head to get a better look and saw its head turn towards us, revealing big red eyes that seemed to glow in the dusk. My brother and I exchanged a glance, both too shocked to speak at first. "Did you see that?" one of us finally asked, and the other echoed, "WTF was that?" We looked back, but it had vanished without a trace. I slowed down a bit, still watching the road, but didn't see anything else. We continued driving, both of us unnerved by what we'd just witnessed. We couldn't find any explanation. No planes, no drones, nothing that matched the description of that dark, winged creature with glowing red eyes. The memory of those moments still haunts me, and I often wonder what we saw that night. Was it a UFO, a military experiment, or something else entirely? To this day, there's no logical explanation, and it remains one of the most mysterious experiences of my life. Southern California incident. This one stayed locked away until now. It happened in Southern California, east of Los Angeles, in 1996. My wife and I were leaving home early one morning. It was still dark as we tried to get on the major highway near our house. Suddenly, something darted out of a residential construction area right in front of our car. It moved so fast that I didn't have time to react and hit it with the side of the car. I slammed on the brakes and told my wife I was going to get out and check what I'd hit. She begged me not to, convinced it was just a dog. But I felt compelled to see for myself. I stepped out of the car and rounded the window, only to come face to face with something I can't even begin to describe. It wasn't a dog. Its size was massive, much larger than any domesticated canine I'd ever seen. It had a mane like a lion's, sharp, menacing teeth that looked straight out of a horror movie, and big bright amber eyes. The creature was standing there, motionless, with a pool of blood forming beneath its mouth. Its eyes were wide open, and there was an unsettling intelligence in its gaze. I backed up slowly, my heart racing. My wife stepped out too, equally horrified. I told her to stay in the car while I tried to process what I was seeing. The creature didn't move at first, but then it swung its head up towards me, its yellow eyes piercing through the darkness. It was like something out of folklore, a skinwalker, perhaps. My blood ran cold. Without thinking, I turned and ran back to the car, urging my wife to drive away as fast as possible. We didn't stop until we were safely back home, where we stayed the rest of the day in fear. That night, we couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes and the creature's menacing presence. We kept quiet about the incident, fearing ridicule and disbelief from others. Even now, years later, the memory lingers, leaving us with more questions than answers about what we encountered on that dark morning in Southern California. This story is unfortunately true. Growing up in the Sierra Nevadas, I wasn't big on camping, but I spent many weekends hiking with family and friends. When I was 16, about 10 years ago, My cousin C came back from her first year of college, and her boyfriend Jay was visiting us. Jay loved hiking with great lake views, so we decided to go on one of our favorite trails. The trail wasn't easy to find, but locals loved it for its stunning views and low tourist traffic. We met a few other hikers along the way, some with dogs. It's a straightforward trail that takes 2 to 3 hours up and the same time back down. There are smaller paths branching off, but we stuck to the main route. We reached the top quickly and enjoyed our lunch overlooking the serene lake. After about an hour, a scream echoed through the woods. It was the distinctive sound of a mountain lion. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream, it's chilling. It sounds like a loud, terrified woman screaming. Hearing this meant there were multiple mountain lions nearby, as it's part of their mating ritual. Mountain lions are dangerous. They attack pets and have been known to target bikers. Jay was terrified, and C and I were uneasy, but we'd heard mountain lions before and seen them from a distance. When we were kids, we once left some stakes in my backyard, hoping to attract a mountain lion for photos. It didn't work, and my mom wasn't happy about the wasted stakes. We decided it was time to pack up and head back down the mountain. About 40 minutes into our descent, Jay realized he'd forgotten his phone at the lookout. In his rush, we agreed that C and Jay would go back to get his phone, while I stayed on the trail to warn any other hikers about the mountain lions. It wasn't the best plan, but it seemed like the safest option at the time. I found a quiet spot to sit by the trail and started reviewing the photos we'd taken. C and Jay had been gone for around 50 minutes when I heard the scream again. It sounded closer this time. I started to panic. If a mountain lion was nearby, and I was alone, I was in danger. About 20 minutes later, the scream returned, unmistakably near. I knew mountain lions don't scream when hunting. They're silent killers. If a lion was hunting me, it would be silent. But that didn't make me feel any less scared. A few minutes later, I heard the scream again, now extremely close. I looked around, trying to find a safe place to hide in case something attacked. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man standing still about 20 feet down the trail. He was a few feet off the path, completely naked, filthy, and emaciated. He just stood there, staring at me. If you're lost in these woods, it's easy to become disoriented, especially if you're alone and running low on food and water. My first thought was that he was a lost hiker, probably been wandering the woods for days. I started walking towards him, asking if he was okay. But something felt off. His presence was unsettling. I felt an intense urge to run, but I stopped about 15 feet away, feeling a deep sense of wrongness. I asked again if he was okay. He looked at me, then opened his mouth wide and screamed. Not a normal scream, but something that sounded just like a mountain lion. It hit me that we'd been hearing him all along. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I started screaming too. Why was he just standing there screaming? Should I run? Should I use the bear mace? Suddenly, he closed his mouth, turned around, and sprinted into the woods at lightning speed. He vanished into the trees, but the feeling of unease lingered. I thought about running down the trail but decided to wait for C and J, who luckily arrived within 10 to 15 minutes. I told them what happened, and we decided to call the rangers when we got service. To this day, I'm left wondering, did I see a mentally ill lost hiker who really needed help, or did I encounter something else? Something not human mimicking a mountain lion's call and stalking us down the mountain. December of 2005. A few high school friends and I were back home from our universities for winter break. As juniors, we'd started a tradition during freshman year to visit random state parks in small towns, exploring and getting into harmless mischief during our one-night trips. We'd all sleep in the back of my Tahoe on a large mattress pad, feeling safe from the elements and any potential dangers. This year, we decided to head to Davy Crockett National Forest. This area is extremely rural and desolate, perfect for our adventurous spirits. We spent our first day exploring abandoned buildings and hidden trails, taking plenty of photos and enjoying the solitude. I had used up all my university printing credits to print detailed mapcast pages for us to navigate. The drive from our hometown, Conroe, took about 2 hours. We stopped in Lufkin, just east of the forest, to eat dinner and pick up some last-minute supplies from Walmart. After dinner, feeling a buzz from some energy drinks and soda, we decided to push our adventure further. We ventured down FM 357, south of Kennard, Texas, exploring Forest Service roads that twisted through rural areas and led to forgotten county roads. I took a break to check MapQuest, matching our current cross streets and relaying directions to my friends. By the time we returned to the road, it was almost 1:30 a.m. We joked about how miraculously we were still awake, but the darkness felt heavy and foreboding. As we drove down another service road, I started to get frustrated. It was almost 2:15 a.m., and I didn't want to end up in someone's front yard in the middle of nowhere. I decided to slow down, but then I noticed a faint light in the distance. Great, I thought. Another driver in the middle of the forest. Moments later, the light vanished. Maybe someone had turned off their headlights. A few seconds later, headlights reappeared. This time, it was a brand new black Chevy Suburban. As soon as I'd flashed my high beams, its lights turned on. 3 men in full suits jumped out and sprinted down the road past my car, not even looking back. It was eerie how lifeless they seemed. Suddenly, the Suburban shifted into reverse and made the fastest backing maneuver I'd ever seen. My heart pounded as I reached for my .26 pistol and told my friends to grab my AR. We were all scared out of our minds, with no cell service in this part of Texas, unable to call for help. As we continued down the narrow road, we saw FM 357 ahead, the same road we'd started on. It felt like we were being led in circles. We passed a used Forest Service fire station on the way back, just like we did on the way in. I checked Google Maps and couldn't find any records of that road or the fire station. The county tax assessor had no listings either. Terrified, we decided to head back to Crockett, not wanting to stay in the desolate area after what had happened. We drove quickly, not daring to look back. The memory of those men in suits and the mysterious Suburban haunted us as we reached the main road. We never talked much about what we saw that night, but the event left a lasting impact. The more I think about it, the more questions arise. Where did those men come from? Why were they dressed so formally in the middle of the forest? How did the Suburban vanish without a trace? To this day, I can't explain what we encountered in the woods of Davy Crockett National Forest. The lack of evidence and the untraceable road on our maps make it feel like we stumbled into something otherworldly. It's a mystery that still chills me every time I think about that December night. Camping with kids. Last month, we went camping with our 2 young kids, hoping for a fun and peaceful weekend in the great outdoors. Everything was going smoothly until the middle of the first night. It was around 3 a.m. when we heard a loud banging on one of the campers nearby. At first, we thought it might be someone trying to break in, or maybe an animal rummaging through their supplies. The sound was intense and persistent, echoing through the quiet forest. My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight and tried to peer outside the tent. The growling of our Labrador, Bella, was unmistakable. She had never been aggressive before, but now she was on high alert, her body tense and ready to defend us. I cautiously stepped out of our tent, flashlight in hand, trying to identify the source of the noise. To my surprise, I saw a man desperately trying to open the zipper of a nearby camper. He looked disheveled and panicked, his eyes wild with fear. I shouted for him to stop, but he ignored me, frantically banging on the camper doors and windows. Bella barked fiercely, and I could see her protective stance as she prepared to confront him. I approached him cautiously, asking if he was okay. He didn't respond, continuing his desperate attempts to get into the camper. Suddenly, he let out a maniacal scream, more terrifying than anything I had ever heard. It was clear he was not in his right mind, perhaps on drugs or experiencing a severe mental breakdown. The situation was unsettling, especially with our two small kids inside the tent, unable to see what was happening but sensing the fear in the air. I decided to call out to him, trying to calm him down, but he continued to scream and bang on the camper. Bella stayed by my side, growling and barking to keep him away. Eventually, he gave up and flowed into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Chips and snacks scattered around the camper, remnants of his frantic attempts to get inside. The rest of the night was tense, with occasional noises that kept us on edge. But thankfully, nothing more happened. The next morning, we discovered the mess he had left behind and reported the incident to the park rangers. They assured us that the man was likely experiencing a mental health crisis and recommended that we keep a closer eye on our campsite. The experience was the strangest and most unsettling night we've ever had camping, reminding us that even in peaceful settings, unexpected dangers can emerge. Encounter on 32nd Street. We were crossing 32nd Street to head toward my car when we heard what sounded like a baby crying. At first, we thought it might be a neighbor's child, but then my father pointed toward the house across the street and called out, "Mariah, Major." I looked and saw a thin black figure perched on a brick fence post, staring directly at us. The figure was jet black, almost absorbing the light around it. It had long, pointed ears and a slim, agile body with a long, pointed tail that swung back and forth like a cat's. But the most striking feature was its glowing red eyes, fixed directly on my father and me. I was frozen in fear, my mind racing on how to protect my elderly father if this thing decided to attack. Without thinking, I urged my father to get into the car quickly. I pressed the remote button to unlock the doors, the horn sounding its chirp as the alarm deactivated. As soon as the horn sounded, the creature opened its wings and stood up on the fence post, chirping back at us in a haunting, eerie sound. Sheriff's encounter. I'm the sheriff of a very small town in Utah that's been shrinking over the years. With fewer people, it means my job gets a bit easier, but it also means letting go of a lot of officers because the town just doesn't need us anymore. One evening, I decided to drive past the outskirts of town. There are numerous abandoned properties there, remnants of a bygone era. Most of the time, nothing unusual happens, but one night, something caught my eye. The door to one of the old houses was open. Curious and a bit concerned, I pulled over to check it out. As I stepped inside, a musty, unpleasant smell hit me, like wet dog mixed with something more sinister. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. The house was old, with wooden floors and a creaky staircase. The wallpaper was peeling, and the air was thick with dust. It looked like the perfect setting for a ghost story. I walked from room to room, noticing that the furniture was left as if the occupants might return any moment. It gave me a strange feeling of sadness, wondering why someone would abandon their home so completely. After checking every room, I started to feel uneasy. I was just walking around, looking at everything, when I heard a door slam downstairs. It was the front door. The heavy sound rattled the windows. I waited, listening for footsteps on the wooden floor, but heard nothing. I approached the window facing the front of the house, hoping to spot someone leaving, but instead, I saw a large, hunched creature pacing outside. It looked like a wolf but was completely different, skinny with matted fur, and it was clawing its way up a tree, moving like a cat rather than a typical wolf. The window was dirty, making it hard to see the details, but I knew it wasn't a normal animal. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, almost backlit, and I immediately connected it to the skinwalker legends. My blood ran cold. I knew I couldn't stay there. Without wasting another second, I grabbed my radio and sped back to my patrol car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of those yellow eyes and the creature's unnerving presence. I made a mental note to report the sighting, but deep down, I knew that some things in these abandoned houses are better left unexplored. Since that night, I've never ventured into those old properties alone, always keeping a wary eye out for anything. or anyone, lurking in the shadows. Larry's story. My name is Larry, and I'm a park ranger on the Appalachian Trail. My job involves patrolling the vast wilderness, ensuring hikers and campers are safe, and preserving the natural beauty of the area. But one day, everything changed. It was a typical autumn afternoon. The leaves were turning golden, and the air was crisp. I was hiking down a narrow path, deep in the woods, when I heard a scream that sounded like a little girl. My heart raced, and I froze in place. The sound came from a nearby playing field, and instinctively, I knew I had to investigate. I started running toward the noise, fear gripping me as I moved deeper into the forest. It felt like something was haunting me, following my every step, but I couldn't let that stop me. I had to find out what was making that sound. When I reached the playing field, there was nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of anyone or anything that could have made the scream. But then, the scream echoed again, louder and more urgent. Without hesitation, I turned and sprinted toward the sand, pushing through thick underbrush. My heart pounded as I moved faster, terrified of what I might encounter. The forest was dense, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. Finally, I reached a clearing where the scream had originated, and what I saw there will haunt me forever. In the center stood a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, a skinwalker, straight out of legends and nightmares. It was tall and thin, with long pointed ears and glowing red eyes. The skinwalker let out a deafening roar and charged at us. As a park ranger, I knew these creatures were supposed to be mythical, but seeing it up close was terrifying. I grabbed my rifle, but the creature was too fast, disappearing into the trees almost instantly. I quickly pulled Sarah, a fellow ranger, and we ran back to the ranger station, our minds racing with fear and disbelief. We reported the incident to the government officials in charge of the park, but they dismissed it as a hoax, perhaps a publicity stunt to attract more visitors. Despite our warnings, more reports of similar sightings began to pour in. The park was eventually closed, and a team of scientists was sent to investigate, but they found nothing conclusive. Days later, the skinwalker had grown more aggressive, attacking campers and hikers without warning. The officials finally took action, but the creature had become too powerful to capture or kill. It roamed the park, terrorizing everyone who dared to enter. Consumed by guilt for not being able to stop it, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Venturing deep into the woods, I faced the skinwalker alone, but it was too much for me to handle. In a tragic end, the creature killed me, and my body was found by Sarah, who had returned to the park once more. The government tried to cover up the truth, but the legend of the skinwalker and Ranger Larry lives on, a haunting tale passed down through generations. To this day, the deep woods of the national park echo with the screams of those who dared to challenge the unknown. Experience in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. About 4 years ago, during a chilly fall evening, I had an experience in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania, that still sends shivers down my spine. Born and raised here, I spent my younger years near the old observatory on Moores Mountain Road and Observatory Drive. Even then, something felt off about that area. The woods didn't feel right, and the open fields had an eerie stillness. The roads never seemed to lead exactly where they should, and Moores Mountain Church boasted Spook Hollow, a logging road that just vanished into the dense woods, exuding an unsettling vibe. Fast forward to October 2012. I was driving home after picking up my brother in LaSalle, Michigan. It was late, just after midnight, and I was on Route 380 heading east towards Lewisberry. The night was calm, the road lit by dimmed streetlights cutting through the darkness. As I approached John Brenman's place, right before Brenman Drive, something caught my eye on the side of the road. There, walking along the roadside, was a man unlike anyone I'd ever seen. He was exceptionally tall, easily 6'6" or taller, and incredibly thin, almost gaunt. His attire was all black, wearing a tight black trench coat that clung to his skeletal frame. His skin was unnaturally dark, and his short hair was as black as his clothing. What was most disturbing was his limp, or what seemed like difficulty walking. As I watched, he suddenly dropped to all fours and scampered across the road in front of my car with alarming speed. His face was a grotesque blend of human and something more sinister, gray-black with sharp, keen features. Before I could react, he vanished into the darkness of the woods, leaving me bewildered and terrified. Once I reached home, the encounter lingered in my mind. Over the next day or two, the image of that man haunted me. I shared the story with a few close friends, but given my background as an enthusiast for the paranormal, interested in cryptozoology, ghosts, and such, they were skeptical. I have always been a bit of a skeptic myself, relying on logic and evidence, but what I saw defied any rational explanation. I couldn't find any information or similar sightings online, and no one in town seemed to know anything about a man matching his description. It felt like I had glimpsed something from another realm, a being that shouldn't exist in our world. The memory of those glowing yellow eyes and his unnatural movements still creeps me out, reminding me that some mysteries remain unsolved and that the legends surrounding our town might hold more truth than we dare to admit. Encounter with a mountain lion in rural Missouri. A few years ago, my friends and I went canoeing through the rural areas of Missouri. We decided to spend the day on the river, enjoying the peacefulness and the beauty of the surrounding woods. In the afternoon, we decided to explore a bit further down the river, away from the usual spots, to get away from any crowds. As evening approached, we realized it was getting dark and decided to set up camp on the shore, as it was too far out to paddle back to the nearest resort. It was middle of nowhere with no cell service, and we were miles from any help. Our dog, a lively puppy named Rocky, was with us, keeping watch as we unpacked. That night, something felt off. The air was still, and the usual sounds of the night were absent. Suddenly, we heard a rustling sound near our campsite. At first, we thought it was just a raccoon or a fox, but the sound was too deliberate, too heavy. Rocky started growling, and his body tensed up, ready to defend us. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just an animal looking for food, but the noises continued. Then, out of the darkness, we saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at us from the edge of the woods. It was a mountain lion, and it was clearly interested in us. It circled our campsite, its movements stealthy and calculated. Panicking, we grabbed our bear spray and slowly backed away from the tent. The mountain lion watched us intently, its eyes never leaving ours. Rocky barked fiercely, trying to scare it off, but the lion didn't back down. It was clear that we were in its territory, and it wasn't going to leave us alone. As the night wore on, the mountain lion continued to stalk our campsite, occasionally making short, menacing snarls. We decided that the safest option was to stay inside the tent, keeping our bear spray ready. Hours passed with the lion maintaining its watch, making us feel both terrified and helpless. By the early hours of the morning, the lion finally moved away, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. We didn't sleep at all, and the experience left us shaken. That night taught us the importance of being prepared and aware of the wildlife in such remote areas. It's a memory that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. Story from the Air Force. I heard this chilling story from a guy I worked with in the Air Force back in 2003 while we were stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea. He shared an experience from his first duty station in Germany about 10 years earlier that still haunts him to this day. He and another airman were sharing a small basement apartment off base. One night, he woke up suddenly to see a dark, shadowy figure standing right in front of his window. He jolted awake, heart pounding, but the figure was gone. The strange thing was that his bed was pushed right up against the window. There was no space for anyone to stand there. Thinking it must have been a bad dream, he tried to go back to sleep but was too rattled. Tossing and turning for hours, he eventually gave up and got up. The same thing happened the next night. Another shadow at 3 a.m. Nervous about being ridiculed, he decided to ask his housemate if they had been in his room around that time. The answer was a firm no, along with some teasing remarks. This continued every night for 2 weeks. Each time, he saw the shadow figure, tried to focus on it, but it would disappear before he could get a clear look. Night after night, he couldn't sleep, waking up around 3:15 a.m. to make coffee and watch TV until it was time for work. Then, one morning during his usual routine, he was sitting on the couch with his coffee when a fireball shot out of the stove, igniting a dried-up houseplant a few feet away. He jumped up and quickly threw the burning plant into the bathtub to extinguish the fire. After that terrifying incident, the dark shadow never bothered him again. He's convinced that whatever it was trying to warn him or perhaps protect him in some way. To this day, he's never fully explained what he saw, but the sudden disappearance of the shadow after the fire remains a mystery. Camping in the Wichita Mountains National Wildlife Refuge. Our family had been camping in the Wichita Mountains National Wildlife Refuge for years, always enjoying the serene beauty and the occasional wildlife encounter. This year was supposed to be no different. On the first night, after a hearty dinner, we packed all our food away in the car. As night fell, the forest around our campground seemed to come alive with sounds: rustling leaves, distant howls, and the usual nighttime creatures. Not long after dark, we heard rustling near our campsite. At first, we thought it was just a raccoon searching for leftovers. We watched as a raccoon approached our picnic table, sniffing around for any remaining food. We decided to let him stay, thinking that if we didn't scare him off, he'd leave us alone. But instead, he circled the table, standing on his hind legs to get a better sniff, before darting past our car toward the next campsite. That's when we realized he wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He was heading straight for us. We heard the unmistakable rustling of a chip bag and rushed to investigate. To our horror, we discovered that we'd left the car window slightly open. The raccoon had climbed inside and helped himself to a bag of potato chips, leaving a mess of crumbs and muddy paw prints all over the seats and floor. He scampered out as soon as we opened the door, but not before wreaking havoc inside our car. The next night, we were extra cautious. We double and triple checked that the car was completely closed and secured. Despite our efforts, the raccoon returned, lingering near the car longer than before, but ultimately finding nothing of interest. The incident left us feeling uneasy, a stark reminder that even the most prepared campers can fall victim to the cleverness of wildlife lurking in the dark. Solo camping in a state park. I decided to go solo camping in a state park one spring weekday, hoping for some peace and solitude. It was a quiet campground, with only a few other campers scattered around. As I settled into my tent, I was about to unwind and read when I heard a strange noise outside. The sound was like a distant howl, reminiscent of something out of a horror movie. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but the howl was different, more guttural and desperate. My heart raced as I listened, trying to determine where it was coming from. Curious and a bit scared, I grabbed my headlamp and peeked outside. I saw nothing unusual, just the dark outline of trees swaying in the night breeze. The dog in my tent, a friendly Labrador named Max, started growling and pawing at the tent flap, clearly sensing something amiss. I decided to investigate, hoping it was just a wild animal looking for food. As I stepped out of the tent, the howling intensified, echoing through the forest. I scanned the area with my headlamp, but saw no sign of anything. Just as I was about to head back inside, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, a large, shadowy figure that disappeared when I tried to focus on it. I froze, my mind racing with thoughts of what it could be, perhaps a mountain lion or a bear. But the howling didn't stop. It seemed to be getting closer, now accompanied by what sounded like faint footsteps. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing that I wasn't alone. Panicking, I rushed back to my tent, pulling the flap closed and securing it tightly. Max continued to growl, his body tense and alert. I sat there, heart pounding, listening to the eerie sounds outside. The howling eventually faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt heavier than before. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every rustle and snap in the dark forest kept me on edge, fearful of what might be lurking just beyond the light of my headlamp. By morning, the unease had lessened, but the memory of that terrifying night lingered, reminding me that even in the most peaceful settings, the wilderness holds its own mysterious and potentially dangerous secrets. Police officer's story. I was just starting my career as a police officer, eager to make a difference and prove myself. One day, while on duty at the station, I found a mysterious note on my desk. It was folded up, with my name written on the front in sloppy handwriting. Inside, there was an address in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. Something about the note gave me an unsettling feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my keys and headed out to investigate. As I drove, the unease only grew. The address led me to an abandoned house in a quiet neighborhood. The place looked creepy and neglected, with overgrown weeds and boarded-up windows. I hesitated for a moment, knowing that breaking into an abandoned property could be dangerous, but something compelled me to proceed. I knocked on the door, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. The house was eerily silent, except for the creaking of the old wood. I decided to step inside, flashlight in hand, searching for any signs of life or clues about who might have left the note. The interior was dark and musty, filled with dust and old furniture covered in white sheets. As I explored the rooms, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every shadow seemed to move, and the house felt alive with unseen presences. I reached the living room, where the air felt particularly heavy. Suddenly, I heard footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate steps that didn't match the creaking of the house. My heart raced as I cautiously made my way toward the staircase. Upstairs, I found an empty bedroom with a broken window. The curtains fluttered in the cold breeze, but there was no one there. I was about to leave when I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, saying my name. I spun around, but the room was empty. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, echoing through the halls. Terrified, I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned into loud, anguished cries, filling the room with a sense of dread. In a desperate attempt to escape, I kicked the door open and bolted out of the house, sprinting back to my car as fast as I could. Once I was safely back at the station, I reported the incident to my superiors, but they were skeptical. They thought it was just a prank or a case of overactive imagination. But I knew what I had experienced was real. Something supernatural was haunting that abandoned house. Despite my reports, the officials refused to take action or investigate further. More reports of strange occurrences in the neighborhood followed, but nothing concrete was found. The abandoned house was sealed off, but the legend of the haunted property and the officer who dared to uncover its secrets persisted. A chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. Winter camping in Algonquin Park. During a winter camping trip in Algonquin Park, we encountered two distinct and unsettling noises that still give me chills. It was a cold, clear evening, and we were settling into our campsite after a day of skiing and exploring the frozen landscape. First noise, the unnatural echo. As we were setting up camp, we heard a strange noise coming from the woods. It was an echoing reverberation, almost electronic in nature, unlike anything natural in the environment. It sounded like a distorted animal call, but the pitch and tone didn't match any known wildlife in the area. At the time, we speculated it might be a moose or something else large moving through the snow, but nothing fit quite right. We later learned that the sound was caused by acoustic dispersion, a natural phenomenon where sound waves bend and spread in unusual ways due to the frozen terrain and specific atmospheric conditions. It explained why the noise was so eerie and out of place, but at the moment, it just added to the mysterious atmosphere of the park. Second noise, haunting vocalizations. Later that night, after we had settled into our tents and tried to sleep, another noise disturbed the silence. This time, it was a series of high-pitched howls and yelps that seemed to move around our campsite. The sounds were unmistakably animalistic, but carried an eerie, almost human-like quality. What made it more unsettling was how the noises appeared to move closer to our tent without any visible source. We sat in our tents, wide-eyed and frozen with fear, listening as the sound circled us and then moved away, only to come back again. The combination of the high-pitched sounds and the lack of any visible animals made us uneasy. It was as if something was stalking us silently. Its presence felt more than seen. After hours of hearing these haunting vocalizations, we couldn't take it anymore and decided to pack up and leave the campsite early the next morning. The experience left us shaken, reminding us that even in the beautiful wilderness, there are mysteries that defy explanation. Tate's wedding anniversary. I was just 3 or 4 years old when we attended Tate's wedding anniversary in North Wales. My grandparents, Tate and his wife, were celebrating at a local social club venue. Most of my extended family was there, but since I was so young, I mainly stayed close to my mom, who was pregnant at the time, with my younger brother and dad by my side. Quick disclaimer, I don't remember much of this story myself, just fragments that my parents have recounted over the years. One thing I do recall is sitting on top of the bar table while my dad went to the restroom. My mom was talking to someone else, and I was being looked after by my older cousins, who mostly chatted amongst themselves. Out of nowhere, a man who looked just like my dad approached me. He was stout, with gray hair, and slightly shorter than my actual dad. That's all I remember seeing. When my dad returned, I told him about the encounter, referring to the man as Tate. He listened carefully, asking me details like what flavor ice cream I chose that day. There was a special ice cream for kids, different from the alcoholic desserts served to adults, though I can't recall its name. My dad insisted that the Tate I met wasn't the real Tate, the one who was celebrating his anniversary. This confused me because my grandfather had passed away when I was just a teenager, and I never knew him personally. My dad had me when he was 43, long after my biological grandfather was gone. There were no photos of the real Tate at the venue, and my name was linked to my stepdad's family, who had been married to my mom for years. Despite my dad's assurance, the family consensus is that the real Tate visited me that day to clarify that he wasn't my blood relative. It's the most bizarre and unsettling explanation I've heard. Thinking that a deceased relative would come back just to set the record straight feels almost too creepy to be true. My husband and I went camping alone. After several years of marriage, my husband and I decided to go camping by ourselves. I planned it to be a romantic getaway, and took our dog, Bella, a Labrador, along so she could enjoy the outdoors too. Everything was perfect until the middle of our first night. Bella is a big dog with a fierce growl. In the dead of night, I woke up to her growling. My heart raced as I realized something was outside our tent. I stayed calm but frantic, quietly waking my husband. "There's something outside the tent," I whispered urgently. We scrambled to grab our flashlights and our bear spray. I could feel my pulse pounding as Bella continued to growl and snarl. We shone our lights outside but saw nothing. The darkness seemed to swallow the beam, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet. Bella's growling didn't stop. I followed her gaze and saw a small, flat bug struggling to get out of the tent's entrance. Relief washed over me as I realized it was just a bug. We carefully helped the bug back outside, and Bella settled down, still on edge. We both breathed a sigh of relief and tried to calm our nerves. But sleep didn't come easily. The incident left us both shaken. The thought of something lurking outside our tent kept us awake for hours. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching us, every rustle of leaves making my heart skip a beat. Finally, exhaustion took over, and we managed to drift into a restless sleep. In the morning, we double-checked the tent and surrounding area to make sure nothing was out there. It turned out to be just a bug, but the fear of the unknown lingered. We packed up quickly, grateful for the safety of our car, and made our way back home. That night taught us the importance of being prepared and staying calm in the face of fear. Sometimes, the wilderness can play tricks on your mind, turning a harmless encounter into a terrifying memory, as is normal. I'm not a cop myself, but I heard this straight from one who was involved. Two veteran cops, let's call them Bob and Mike, responded to a 911 call from a quiet neighborhood block in a large city. When they arrived, an older woman greeted them. She had a thick Caribbean accent and seemed nervous but polite. She explained that she didn't make the call and suspected some local punks had done it as a prank, complaining about her to get back at her. Bob was the more rational of the two, calm, educated, and used to handling tense situations with stoic professionalism. But something about that house just felt off to him. The house itself wasn't large, but it was immaculate and well kept. There were no strange sounds or smells to indicate anything was wrong. Yet Bob couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. After taking the report, they left the house. Mike, the other cop, looked at Bob and said, "Damn, I'm so glad to be out of there." That place freaked me out. This bothered Bob because Mike was a seasoned officer from the homicide department and had served in an elite military unit. Both of them were unnerved, which was unusual given their experience. Back on duty, Bob couldn't stop thinking about that house. When he had some downtime, he decided to go back and talk to the block captain for more details. He approached her and asked, "Hey, you know that Caribbean lady on your block?" The captain responded coldly, "Oh, you mean the witch?" Bob was confused. What? Remember those kids that were causing trouble for her? Apparently, one of the local punks had thrown a rock at her window not long before Bob and Mike visited. The woman confronted him, and witnesses say she swore he would regret it that very night. The punk's parents rushed him to the local hospital after he was injured, but strangely, he recovered miraculously. The ER couldn't find any reason why a previously healthy teenager would be in such pain. They found no injuries, poisons, or anything to explain his condition. Overnight, his organs started working again, and he was back to normal by morning with no lasting damage. Bob was creeped out when he told the captain about the incident. Just today, a friend and I were hiking on some abandoned land near our hometown. It was beautiful with lakes and cliffs, but as night fell, we turned around. My friend whispered about skinwalkers, and we decided to head back to the car to avoid any risks. A few minutes into the hike back, we felt like we weren't alone. We hurried back, but the air grew thick and hard to move through, with a constant hum that made everything feel distorted. We stumbled upon an area we hadn't explored yet, with deer tracks going in every direction and human footprints mixed in. There was no clear starting point for the tracks, and no sign of other hikers for miles. The trek back to the car felt like both 5 minutes and 3 hours at the same time. We were disoriented and scared, plagued by the feeling that something was watching us. As we reached the car, we saw deer prints everywhere and heard faint sounds that didn't belong to any known animal. We couldn't explain what we experienced, whether it was a skinwalker or something else entirely. The memory of that night still haunts me, leaving me with more questions than answers about the mysteries lurking in our forests. When I was a kid, growing up, my childhood home was built in 1840 and had been remodeled countless times. Weird things always seemed to happen there, making it an unsettling place to live. When I was 5, while renovating the kitchen, my family discovered human remains hidden within the walls. They were reported and collected, but we never heard any follow-up or explanations. The incident left a lingering sense of unease in our household. When I was about 13, I stayed overnight at a friend's house. My mom was downstairs in the living room, and she suddenly heard what sounded like someone trashing my bedroom, smashing out the window and jumping onto the roof of the front porch. Terrified, she immediately called the police. When they arrived, They found no signs of forced entry or any disturbances. It was as if nothing had happened. Another night, I was asleep in my room when my dog started growling loudly, waking me up. I listened closely and heard the sound of drawers being thrown open and glass breaking downstairs. Boots were walking around the house. It was before cell phones were common, so I couldn't call anyone for help. I tried to calm my dog by giving him a bone and quietly crawled to my brother's room down the hall. He was awake too, and together, we decided to check the noise. He grabbed his baseball bat and went into our mom's room. She was already on the phone with 911, explaining that she heard the noises but saw no one. When the police arrived, they heard the same sounds coming from outside the house, but found no signs of forced entry or any disturbances. Fresh snow covered the ground, and there were no abnormal footprints outside. Living in that old house, with its dark history and unexplained noises, left a lasting impression on me. The two incidents where the police had to investigate made me realize that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed. Even now, years later, the memories of those nights still haunt me, making me cautious about the unknown forces that might exist just beyond the safety of our homes. Solo camping with a Labrador. At 25, I decided to go solo camping with my Labrador Bella. I set up my tent at the edge of a dense forest, looking forward to a weekend of solitude and nature. The first night was peaceful, with only the sounds of the forest surrounding me. Bella settled down beside the tent, her presence a comforting one. But in the middle of the night, everything changed. I was awakened by Bella's growling, a deep, menacing sound that I'd never heard her make before. My heart raced as I realized something was outside our tent. I quietly woke my husband, whispering, "There's something outside the tent." We both grabbed our flashlights and headed outside to investigate. The forest was eerily silent, the usual nocturnal sounds absent. Bella was growling and snarling, her body tense and alert. I followed her gaze and saw nothing. No movement, no shadows, just the thick darkness of the woods. We approached the tent cautiously, shining our lights around, but there was nothing to see. Feeling a mix of fear and frustration, we realized that whatever was making the noise wasn't visible. We checked the tent thoroughly, ensuring that all zippers were securely locked. Bella continued to growl, but we couldn't find the source of the disturbance. After a few minutes of searching with no results, we decided to secure the tent and get back inside. That night, sleep eluded us. Every rustle in the bushes or snap of a twig heightened our anxiety. Bella remained on high alert, her growling echoing through the silent forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. By dawn, we decided to pack up and leave as quickly as possible. We double-checked the tent and our gear, making sure everything was secure. As we left the campsite, the fear slowly subsided, but the memory of those terrifying hours stayed with us. Bella and I never forgot that night, a stark reminder that even the most familiar places can hold unknown dangers lurking in the darkness.